Welcome to the Rant Live.
Welcome to the Rant Live, everyone, and welcome to what is the final week of August. Well, kind of, right? I mean, I guess next week is conceptually the final week, but we're in the final 7 days of August.
Yes, on the calendar, as far as 7 days go.
Yep. So we're almost to September, and that means, pretty much the last month. I think the Cubs have one game on October 1st, and I believe it's against the Brewers, actually.
It is. Yeah, they finish up the season against the Brewers.
And so, man, I'll tell you what, things are setting up to be very, very interesting down the stretch. I mean, after this easy stretch, which the Cubs haven't coasted through, but it feels like it's been worse than it has. I mean, the past week they're 5-2. It feels like they're 500 because they keep losing to bad teams, and they're all close games.
That's
like
the thing. It's the close games. They haven't blown anybody out.
No, they're like winning really close games, which good. That's good. I mean, they're doing what they need to do. The problem is the Brewers are freaking on fire. They've won 6 straight, and they're just
they've got a horseshoe up their ass or something. I mean, these good teams are just like laying down for them. They're winning in the dumbest fashion. Like, it's the opposite of what's happening with the Cubs. But it is kind of like what was happening with the Cubs when they were in that hot stretch where it's just like, if you're not blowing teams out, like all the breaks are going your way. Like that's what's tough is that the Cubs, that's, I think, actually more than the close games is not only are the Cubs squeaking by in some of these, but the Brewers keep winning. And so they're not gaining any ground on that at all. And that's what kind of sucks.
Something's going to give here because the Cubs, after they finish out this series against the Pirates in Pittsburgh, they are going to be home against the Brewers for 3 games, and then they're home for 4 games against the Reds, which includes a doubleheader. Away. They're away, which includes a doubleheader. And so you're talking 7 games against, the 2 teams they're battling. And you would think that following those 2 series, things should be, they should be clearer. They could be clearer. They could also be, we could also find ourselves exactly where we currently are, which is in a really tight race. I mean, the Cubs currently are 4 games back, right? They're 6 games over 500. They're winning games. Like I said, I mean, they're 14-8 in August with a .636 win percentage, which is their best win percentage of any month. I mean, obviously there's still some days left, and so we'll see what happens there. But they're playing as well as they played all year in terms of winning, right? It doesn't feel like it feels like their pitching is like, man, there's a lot that needs to kind of continue to break their way. The bullpen's really been carrying them and playing well, thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But Drew Smiley, I don't think he's going to pitch. I don't think he's going to start again. I think it'd be a major mistake.
He's done. He's done as a starter. Absolutely,
at least for the Cubs.
So here's a question, and I've gone back and forth on this a little bit, and now I'm confused as to where I lie on this. So
that's never good.
So David Ross, right, came out and named Smiley initially as the probable starter for Sunday in Pittsburgh, right? And then the next day, and everybody was like, "What in the hell?" After he had given up 7 earned runs in like 3 innings or whatever, right?
Like his confidence is gone. That's the problem.
And everybody knew it. So here's the problem. So when he was announced as a starter for that game, everybody's like, "What in the hell are you doing? You can't start this dude." And if you do, he can only be an opener, right? But Ross kept him in there to wear one because effectively it was like you could tell they were punting on that game in the hopes that Smiley would maybe find something, and at the very least would be able to give him like 5 innings and get him through and help the bullpen. Well, he didn't. So that start was dumb. It was dumb to give him that start, period, right? And then Ross names him as a starter for Sunday. Now, my question is this. And then the next day, that was on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, Jordan Wicks is scratched from his start, whoever he said should have started for Smiley the first time, the last game, and he's going to. He's being promoted, right? They haven't made an official move yet because that requires a 40-man spot. And they got to send somebody down if he's not pitching until Sunday. he won't be activated. We'll probably find out about that tomorrow. But again, so I'm just laying out all the context. So do we think that Ross was being kind of an idiot and naming Smiley as the starter and then had to be told by the front office, like, nah, bro, that is not doing it.
No.
Or
interesting.
With Ross saying, hey, Jed, get your head out of your ass. I need better pitchers. I'm going to make him the starter again and force you to do something to give me some help up here. So do we think that Ross was not that guy, right? Was this a move that the front office made to slap Ross in the hand and be like, dude, quit being a dumbass? Or was Ross the one goading, kind of playing chess and baiting Jed Hoyer into making the move?
I got to believe it's the latter. I do. And I mean, because who else was he going to start, right? Like, what was it? What were his other options?
Yeah. I mean, a bullpen, my
the same, like a starter, going with the starter.
Yeah.
An opener, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Or, I mean, shit, anybody like Hayden Wisniewski would have been a better option, right?
And he hasn't been great either, but he's been better.
Here's the problem I have with that, though, look, Smiley has sucked, so it's not like you got to give him a break for that or that he deserves special treatment. But what sucks about it, though, is the way that that's done with him being named as the probable starter, which should never have happened. To me, you make that TBD, right? You put TBD there, and now there's speculation, but we knew he should have been moved back to the bullpen. But then as it is, it creates a question of him being named the starter. Everybody being like, what in the hell are you doing? And then you've got to further address the fact that, like, nah, he's actually being moved back to the bullpen. If you just name him TBD, everybody knows he's going back to the bullpen, and you can kind of sort of talk about it. But it was thinly veiled, right? Like, Wicks got pulled from his start on Wednesday, and it wasn't injury related. Like, hey, the writing was on the wall in very big, bold letters. We knew it was happening. So one way or the other, whatever it was, right? Whether it was the front office being like, Ross, you're a dumbass, or Ross being like, hey, Jed, you're a dumbass, give me somebody better. I'm excited to see Jordan Wicks get a shot.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to.
Right.
But it's like, it's like, should it come to this where, sorry, I'm having chair problems. Should it come to this, though, where it feels like there is a weird dynamic happening between the front office and David Ross? And, and it's kind of like, I mean, it feels like some of these young guys could have probably been brought up a little earlier. There has been the 40-man crunch, which is resolved. I think there's 2 open spots on the 40-man. 3. Okay.
Well, there'll be once Wicks is officially added, then there'll be 2, but there's 3 currently.
And so that crunch has been addressed, and it's just, and if anything, the Cubs just really need more pitching. I mean, I think offensively, I don't see many issues. I mean, they still don't have a lot of power, but I mean, they're able to put runs up for the most part. I mean, there's a game here and there where they're not, like last night's game wasn't great, but a good pitching performance is going to happen. And so, like, offensively, I don't feel really terrible, but it's just, I think going into the playoffs, it's always about pitching, right? It's always about pitching. And if you don't lock that down and get this figured out, and the Cubs have a month to figure it out, but they're also, they've got to keep winning games, because right now, I mean, the wild card race is tight.
Yeah,
it is tight. There's like 6-7 teams in the wild card race right now. And the race for the division is up in the air pending the outcome of this upcoming series against the Brewers.
Yeah. And I think the thing is too, you look at that last month of the season and those teams that are in it. Oh, guess what? Who's in it? The Giants. Cubs got to play them 3 times. Guess who else is in it? The Diamondbacks. Cubs got to play the D-backs 7 times in September. Like 7, dude, they play the Reds thrice. They're already done with the Cardinals. They play Pittsburgh 3 times, and they'll play Milwaukee 3 times that last month. They play the Diamondbacks 7 goddamn times. Like, what kind of scheduling is that? It's just super weird. That's at this point, right? I don't think it's necessarily one or the other. I think they certainly should be trying to push for the division, but honestly, I don't know if they have a better shot at it, but between all the teams that are packed up there in that wild card race and the fact that they got to play, I mean, right there alone, I think it's 20 of their remaining 34 games are against teams with whom they are directly competing, either for the division or the wild card, and realistically both, depending on what happens with Milwaukee. So
Yeah.
it's a tough stretch, right? Now, these aren't super world-beating team, and then they do have to play the Braves in there 3 times again too in Atlanta. So that's not easy. But yeah, like you said, it's pitching, and it was hilarious. Like, there were comments, and Facebook comments are always interesting. But there were like a bunch
nice
of people,
way of putting it.
Yeah, there were a bunch of people bagging on Kyle Hendricks because he did kind of have a slow start, but the dude only gave up 2 runs. Like, somebody's like, I wish Wicks were starting tonight. Like, Hendricks gave up 2 runs. The Cubs didn't score. It wouldn't have mattered who was
Hendricks
pitching.
just isn't sexy anymore, right? He's not that like sexy pick. And he just goes out there and does his thing. I mean, sometimes he gets blasted for a few home runs, but generally speaking, he's been pretty good.
And usually when he had that awful inning against the Braves, right, a couple weeks back.
Mm-hmm.
But by and large, he's not getting hit hard. Like, when these things are happening, like, there's bloops and little bleeders that are falling and finding space. But I'd love to see it. The one thing that really concerns me, though, is like, he can't figure out that changeup, and I'm not saying like he's not throwing it very often. I'm saying when he does throw it, it's bad. Like,
it is bad.
Like, that
it's right in the middle of the plate.
Well, it's either that or he's missing by like 5 feet. I mean, he has no idea where it's going, and that's the problem. But the changeup's still great. But yeah, outside of that, now I will say this, right? Saturday, Javier Assad's going tonight. He has looked great.
He's like their best pitcher right now.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he really, like,
basically.
I mean, he's the most consistent. He has not given up in the last 4 starts since he took over for Stroman. He hasn't given up more than 2 earned runs in a game. He gave up 3 total in one of those, but it's 2 runs. He stretched out when he pitches efficiently. That first one we did pitch against the Braves, right? That was one where it's kind of short or whatever. I think he only went like 3 2/3 or something like that on like 83 pitches, or 3 1/3, whatever it was. But he was working a lot of deep counts. But we've seen him go 6, 7, more than 5 innings each of the last 3 games. So he's helping out the bullpen. He looks good. He's working efficiently. Not a big strikeout guy, but he's kind of pitching like the guy Hendricks used to be, right? Not a ton of strikeouts, but not a ton of walks, and just getting outs via contact. And that's so helpful. Now, he's not a guy that you would peg to be a top 3 playoff starter guy, but you talk about having a length reliever. I mean, the way it's going, who else are they going to throw out there? Like, you don't trust Tyon. I mean, who knows what Wicks is going to do, but it's doubtful, right? Like, and this is what I want people to make sure they don't like overhype Wicks coming in. Like, don't expect him to go out and throw a shutout game 1, right?
Yeah, but if he does,
it's
going to be overhyped.
Immediately. Think about Wisniewski. Remember, like, when he debuted and struck out 8 dudes, and then it's been like, oh my God, what? I think we talked about this. I probably brought this up in the last one. It was like, oh, what a steal. And now it's like, shit, this guy can't even get through a couple of games unscathed. I mean, the stuff is there, but I mean, steal is still there. But I have concerns over this dude continuing to push and set new career highs each time he goes out there. And I mean,
listen, over the season, he's 14-3. He's got a 2.8 ERA. I mean, he's the best pitcher by a mile. But to your point, like, he's at the 138 innings, which I think is the most he's ever pitched, right?
Oh yeah, like 119 was his high from last year. So, and that was, and we're talking any professional season ever, right? So he never even combined for that in any across any minor league, because he had a lot of injuries and things that where I have concern, and I think he can still pitch perfectly well. It feels a little bit like these last few starts, even though he's still really good, like if you were trying to conserve fuel efficiency, right? And you were driving up a hill and you get to the top and then you just let the car coast, like it's still keeping up. It's, similar velocity because gravity is helping it, but you're not actually providing any energy. And I feel a little in watching him start these last few times out that he's kind of in that same, and I'm not saying he's not putting effort into it, right? I don't want to look at it like that. So in that regard, it's a difficult analogy, but what I'm saying is I think and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because
he's trying not to go all out,
pitch.
right? He's not pedal to the metal. His ERA in
conserving.
August is a 4.13 ERA. Now his FIP is 3.5, and that's largely because he's got a 370 batting average on balls in play, which is ridiculously high. And so he's getting some bad luck there. But I mean, he's given up more home runs than he usually does. You know, he's not getting as many ground balls as he usually does. And, you know, but he's still getting the strikeouts. And so it's like, yeah, it does feel like, you know, if you could give him a little bit more rest than he's been getting, it'd be nice. But the Cubs are so short on starters, right? They don't have that sixth guy.
Yeah.
That they can rotate in there.
And that's where hopefully, you know, Wicks can step in. I mean, we have to assume, right? And here's the thing. It's a good start for him. Pittsburgh's terrible against left-handed pitchers. The Reds aren't very good against lefties, and he's probably going to take one half. He and Assad will probably split that doubleheader on Friday. And the Cubs have a day off on Thursday, so you can kind of, you know, stretch a little bit with that, you know, with Steele. I mean, he'll get, I think, with the second game against the Brewers, I think he goes Tuesday. You know, and then they got the Thursday off, so they can kind of give him that little extra, you know. I'd still like to see them find a way, and the only way you could do this is if the starters go deep enough. If you can push in and get a couple of innings out of Wisniewski, 2 or 3, and maybe do a bullpen game and get a couple out of Smiley, you know, I mean, throw him in there in the middle. But that's another dude. You talk about not having your curveball. I mean, when you throw your curveball like 60% of the time and you can't put it past anybody anymore, and like then you're not fooling anybody, right? That's just killed it. And man, if this team is serious about spending money, I don't know that Drew Smiley is on it next year. I do not put it past them to eat that money for next year.
They're doing it with 5 other players.
You know, I mean, like you kind of feel like it's kicking the can down the road on the Hayward. Like Hayward's money fell off. Well, we'll just put that toward a whole bunch of other guys that we DFA'd.
Let's just add more dead money.
Yeah, because like what was it, like 7 with Mancini or something like that, and right now it's at least 9 with Smiley because the bonuses, which again is another reason. Like you moved him out of the rotation. So here's another thing. Do you feel like putting him back in the rotation? I had theorized that, like, from a business perspective, that it may have been a way for let's just say, and I don't think this would come up, but what if he were to, you know, file a grievance and say, well, they moved me to the bullpen and limited my innings so I couldn't earn these bonuses. You know, is it like
anyway?
I don't think there's any, but by them putting him back in there again in the rotation, he gives up 7 runs. They're kind of like, nah, bro. Like, yeah, you've got no leg to stand on. And
he doesn't.
And I almost feel like that also could have been an audition for his future, to be honest, because like, what does Drew Smiley give you in a bullpen role that you can't go out and get from someone far more dynamic, right? Yeah. Who you can trust in a rotation or in a spot to miss bats. I will tie that to, so the Cubs recently or yesterday released Danis Correa, who you know, little guy. He's like 5'10", 5'11", like a $150, but had a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and a wicked slider. I thought last year he could be a dude who could have come up and helped the bullpen. He didn't. Had some injuries and things this year. We saw him pitch on Thursday in Indianapolis, and like they made him wear it, dude. He came in relief, and I think he gave up 6 earned runs. Like the Cubs gave up, or maybe it was 5. They gave up 7 runs in the inning. He had come on in relief with runners on, and they got charged to the starter. But I think he gave up 5 of those that were charged to him, and they had nobody warming, right? Like he came out for a second inning, like there was nobody in the bullpen. Like you're gonna wear it. Next day he gets released, and it felt like that was one of those where they said, "All right, this is you. If you get into it, get out of it." And he couldn't do it. I mean, he eventually, right, finished the inning. And then it was just like, well, shit. All right. You're done now. And I don't know that those are the same things necessarily, but it kind of felt like that with Smiley, where they were just like, all right, dude, here's your shot. Show us you got something. Please give us we want a reason to keep you around.
He's
Now
bad.
it's
Bad.
just do you think he's on the team? Is he on the team next year in any capacity?
I mean, God, I don't know, man. I think it depends on what their bullpen looks like. He's not a starter. He's definitely not going to be a starter. So if anything, I think, I mean, unless they convince themselves and he does all this work in the offseason and he fixes whatever, but to me, it's just a mental thing, right? More than anything, right? I mean, like, yeah, his pitches have been ineffective, but I mean, you just see him, right? Like his body language when he's out there on the hill is just, it's bad. It's dejected. You can see there's absolutely no confidence there. And if we can see that watching on TV, the other teams can see it, right? And they just go out and attack. And so I don't know.
And I mean, the rotation in general, right? Like there's a lot of question marks, man. I mean, obviously you got Steele. Tyon's clearly under contract. We don't know what Stroman's going to do. A lot of people still think he'll opt out. And I'm like, dude, I don't know. He was awful starting from London. He was terrible. And then he's got his fractured rib cartilage injury. That's certainly interesting. Look, I get weird stuff can happen, but to be as bad as he was, we're talking a 9.0 ERA over 7 starts. Now he's probably not going to pitch again this year. It certainly seems like it's trending that way. So let's say he's gone. You can't have Smiley in there, right? They have to go. Like I'm not disparaging Steele in any way, but and he has been great, but I do not believe Justin Steele is the guy who can truly be the ace of a team. Let's Braves, Dodgers, whatever, what the Cubs used to be. If you are truly planning to contend, you say, we will win this division. Now we're going to go win in the playoffs. I don't know that Justin Steele is that dude who's your number one guy. And I know that's not like he was the
not
ERA
this year.
For most of the season.
Not this year.
Yeah. Can he get better?
Yes. Yeah. In the future, 100%.
But they need someone else because I don't trust Steele or I don't trust Stroman, even if he comes back, to be that number 2.
What's weird though is that the pitchers that are carrying the Cubs right now are all from the Cubs system.
Yeah. Which is nice.
Plain and simple. Every single one of the guys you look at in the pen and in the starting rotation, the Cubs can rely on.
Fulmer and Merriweather have been really good.
Still.
But
yes,
but I mean,
they happen.
They have a homegrown closer, which, oh my God. Yeah. Somebody, speaking of Facebook comments, somebody said yesterday, I think that because Alzolay hasn't been dominant as the closer, that they should stretch him back out and use him in the rotation.
Huh? Isn't he like leading the league in saves in August?
He's converted his last 15 now.
That's
and I think since July 5th, and leads Major League Baseball in that category. It's like, well, but he's given up like a run in the last couple. Like, okay,
whatever.
But it was just funny to me because it's like this is what you've been looking for this whole time. Like he's clearly got that mentality. He's got the dog in him, so to speak, right? But no, I going back to it. I mean, I think they need to get on the market, whether it's a trade. They've got plenty of redundancy in the minors that they could eventually swing a trade for one of the, people. Oh, starter's too expensive. Like, okay, from a prospect standpoint, but like you can't have 8 outfielders all over the place. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to work.
That doesn't make any sense, especially minor league guys.
Yeah, you got to start moving some of these because that's the thing. At the end of the day, like prospects. Speaking of which, man, if people continue to hug Pete Crow Armstrong as hard as they are, he's going to suffocate before he ever makes it to Chicago. There were so many people absolutely just shitting themselves over the idea of him playing right field. Oh, he can't play right. He should never play right. He can only play center. He's got to be the best. Like, people, it's okay. Like Alexander Canario can play a little center field. You can move PCA over to left or right. It's okay. And if he comes in as a defensive replacement for someone, and maybe that's Suzuki, and maybe he plays right in the majors for an inning or two late in the game, it'll be okay. I think a lot of people felt like the Cubs were going to move him up and play him every day in right field forever or something. It's like, yo, it'll be fine. Like, it was so weird. I mean, people were like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This is a dumb decision. Like, it's a minor league game, dude.
When's the AAA season end?
Like mid-September.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if there's a call up of PCA. You know, once you get to the end of the AAA season, he's not going to get regular ABs anyways down there. So I definitely see him being called up. I just don't think he's going to get like every day starting. No. He'll get in there as like, maybe they'll put him in as a DH. Maybe they'll rotate him in and put Tachman as the DH or maybe not Bellinger, but
I mean, he'll pinch run, you know, and that's the thing is like he can come in for somebody, he can come in for Gomes as a pinch runner, you know, if Amaya isn't already in the game, that kind of a thing. The big thing he brings at this point is the energy. And I've said for a long time he should have just skipped, or he could have simply skipped AAA. Like there was no reason. I mean, he clearly was good enough, too good for AA, and of course, you get all kinds, man. It doesn't matter. You could throw out anything. You'll get all these takes. Well, he's only doing that. Like, look, man, all he's got to do is be an average hitter. That's it. I mean, the glove will play regardless. And no, I mean, he's an exciting guy. Yeah, he'll definitely be up. I mean, Wicks will be up. I think Luke Little will end up coming up and helping as a lefty out of the bullpen. You know, there's a couple other guys. I know Shane Green is down there. He's been in the league for a long time and is kind of working his way back. I mean, he could be a middle innings type of guy. You've also got Brad Boxberger and Nick Birdie. Boxberger, I think, through yesterday. I know he's with the iCubs right now, but he's on the 60-day IL. Birdie's on the 60-day IL. So look at those 2 spots left after Wicks. You know, where do you allocate them? And I could see them going. I know a lot of people will probably be pissy if it's not Crow Armstrong right away. But as you said, I think they continue to let him play out as much of that AAA season as possible. Somebody else is probably going to have to get DFA'd along the lines and outright to clear yet another spot because, you know, there's a few guys out there on the right, you know, maybe it's Jared Young. I don't know, but there's a few guys who are on that roster that could still be kind of cleared out. To make that stuff happen. But I mean, it'll be fine. He'll be up. It'll be okay. Right. Even if he comes in, it's just as a pinch runner and he doesn't even play defense. It'll still be okay. I will guarantee everyone out there that the world will continue to spin on its axis if Pete Armstrong does not play center field every day, all the time at Wrigley upon his promotion. Guarantee it.
Yeah. I mean, and the Cubs are right there. It feels like they're on the verge of a breakthrough, right? It's like they just can't quite get over that hump, but they still have plenty of time. Like I said, they're still playing their best baseball right now in terms of winning. And so, you know, for as rough as things have gone, and the injuries that they've seen, particularly to Stroman, especially, right? But I mean, he was heading down before he got injured, his performance. And so, you know, you're there, you're close. You're real close. Just a couple pieces need to fall into place for the Cubs. Wicks coming up and turning into a reliable piece. He's going to be a starter, and the bullpen continuing to play well, I think is going to bode well. And you get Hendricks pitching well. You get Assad continuing to pitch well. You get Smiley out of there. And Tyon just needs to get some things to break his way. But, you know, I mean, all we need is a good month. And it's certainly possible that the Cubs can, you know, can get there. But, I mean, a lot of teams are playing well, and then a lot of teams are playing really badly. And the fact that the way the schedule is spread out has made it so that, you know, all the teams kind of are playing equal opponents, right? It's very, I think the change to the schedule has been just incredible for baseball, like in terms of how interesting things are and kind of what it's done to the races. You look at the American League Central versus the AL East, and I mean, and the NL as well, just how close and tight it is. I think the rule changes have been really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worked out pretty well. Exactly as predicted, right? Like who's fussing about the pitch clock these days? Is anybody even bringing that? Have you even heard anything about it? Like occasionally you'll see a penalty here or there, but again, everybody freaked out about it early, and now like you don't even You don't even notice it. You don't pay attention at all.
The only time that's going to be an issue is if you get in the playoffs and there's a really critical moment and there's a violation. But I think the catchers and the pitchers have gotten good enough to figure it out, right? It's like the catcher knows when to call timeout. He's keeping his eye on that. And so it's like on the clock, and so it's like if there's a man on first base, just throw it over there, just to reset the clock. So there are ways to manage through, the clock getting down to zero and not having a violation.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's worked out pretty well. And nobody notices it, but I mean, you get the bigger bases, you got the throw over stuff. I mean, I think the game there's a little more action. We're seeing more stolen bases, right? Runs are up. I mean, so and game times are down on average. Although I do feel like, and this was something that I kind of, again, I think people were almost overreact. Like players were almost over, pitchers were going a little too fast early as they kind of acclimated to the timing that it would take and the adjustments there. So you'd see guys and they're throwing with 8 seconds left on the clock. Now you're seeing them draw that down a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
that was fitness level was really impacting that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the game, I haven't looked at it, so I could be dead wrong on here, but just anecdotally, it feels like the games are back to closer, not back to the full length of like a 305 average or something like that. But, early it was like, man, we're seeing these games like 220 and occasionally you'll see a fast game anyway, but it does, again, the pace seems to have balanced a little bit better, which is again, how these things tend to work, right? The pendulum swings one way, swings back. So,
and the scoring's been up too, right? I mean, like at least for the Cubs, you've been averaging, I think, right around 10 runs a game, probably,
which is nice.
At least this month, I would say. Just looking at all the different
well,
scores,
it helps when you drop 36 on the Reds and consecutive, between two games.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be nice. I would like to see them hang a 20 spot on Pittsburgh, like just jump on this Selby guy early. Pittsburgh's going with an opener Saturday. Same thing they did with Rob Z, friend of the program.
Good old Rob.
Which is like a good bad thing. Like I was like glad to see him get another shot. But it's also like, you kind of good luck, buddy. Because they had DFA'd him earlier, and outrighted him. He hung around and we just missed him by a day because he got outrighted. I think he got called up and he made the start as the opener on Thursday. And it's kind of ironic because the Cubs and the iCubs are playing. So you got like a bunch of dudes who could kind of float between Indianapolis and Pittsburgh with those two teams playing. So, should be interesting, but a lot of guys there and there's nobody out there. It's been so blasted hot. I assume Saturday will be a little bit busier. We're going out of the game tonight. But Thursday, man, there was nobody. Like when the Iowa Cubs first started playing, when they realigned, things at the AAA level, those first couple times they came to town, like they did a pre-sale, like specifically, like the Indianapolis Indians set this aside. Like you had to register and there was a time and I forget where I was. I think I might've been in Phoenix actually at the time. Because it was like before the season, because the schedule's already out. You could go and buy tickets for the two series when the iCubs were coming to town. And now it's kind of like, 2 days before I went onto the Indianapolis Indians site and there were tickets all over the place, and then not a lot of people came out because it was like 110-degree heat index with insane humidity. I mean, it was
that
awful.
Does not sound good. That does not sound good.
It was brutal. Like they were like, I mean, outdoor activities were canceled at schools and things like that. I think it was actually up higher in some parts like north of here a little bit, but it actually ended up like once the sun got down below the edge of the stadium out there and it kind of cooled down a little bit. But what kind of sucks is like normally you can go there, and that's what I love about minor league games, right? You get down there on the field, the guys are out there warming up, they're signing autographs, they're taking pictures, things like that, and they're out there a little earlier. This was like, all right, 15 minutes before it's when we get out to do our stretches.
Do the thing.
All right, get back into the thing. But yeah, so I don't really know where I was going with that one. I think I started with the Pittsburgh Pirates opener for tonight, who's a dude who's only been up pitching with them, this month.
Yeah.
I mean, he'll get his strikeouts. He's got a big fastball, good slider, big curve. tons of strikeouts, but relatively speaking, but he also gives up a ton of hits. So the Cubs need to jump on it. But either way, I mean, I think as we saw again with that first game, of course, we saw him get out and then have to eke it out there toward the end. That's the one thing. The Cubs have actually been pretty good about scoring early. The issue that I have is sometimes it does feel like, oh, cool, we're ahead. We got the lead. We're good. Like, no, man. I know they're not choosing to not score, but we do see that a lot to where they get out to an early lead. So I would just like to see them early and often jump on this dude, put the foot on the throat, and get to Sunday. And
what would be really nice is if the Cubs could win these next two games and the Brewers would lose their next two games, and so they go into the series with the ability to come out of it in first place.
Yeah,
in Wrigley, gonna be rocking. It's like, I mean, that'd be ideal. And so it's just like the Cubs can only control what they can control, right? And so you're right. They've got to come out. They've got to win these next two games. Bottom line. And they've got to be very, very serious and very, very business-like about it. They need the bats going. As far as I'm concerned, the playoffs are today, right?
Yeah.
And you got to go because there's just too much. There's too many teams grouped up in there. Like you said, they're playing too many of these teams down the stretch. They hold their destiny in their own arms, like quite literally in their own arms. And so it'll be fun to watch, though. I think this last month is going to be, it's got the potential to really be one heck of an interesting month for sure for the Cubs.
It should be. Well, I mean, I guess we hope it is, right? And that's the thing is they've shown the ability to hang with the good teams, right? I mean, when the Rays came to town, they were the best team in baseball. Cubs beat them 2 out of 3.
Mm-hmm.
Braves came to town, best team in baseball. Cubs beat them 2 out of 3. They looked like crap against the Mets, and then they went to Toronto and took care of business there. So, and prior to last night, this is, again, some people are like, oh, they can't beat the bad teams. Like, folks, they had beaten the Pirates all 7 times they had played them this season prior to last night. So, I mean, at some point, somebody's like, you can't, generally you're not going to go undefeated against a divisional rival, no matter how bad they are. So you're going to lose one. And hey, kudos to Mitch Keller, who, and I wrote that up in the lineup post, like his stuff and the way he's been pitching. I mean, he was an all-star. Right, the ERA was a little elevated going into that, but that was a dude who has the kind of stuff to be able to shut down an entire. And he looked really, really good his last time out. So I mean, that sometimes you just run.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's not a big deal. The Cubs have, I mean, granted, they, like you said, they lost the series against the Mets, but they've won. Outside of that Mets series, they've won every series this month. I mean, with the exception of the White Sox because it was only a 2-game series and they split it. But they've won every series this month besides that Met series. And so that there's nothing to complain about. And that's the point, right? It's just that they've been playing a lot of close games. You want them to kind of start blowing some of these teams out. But at the end of the day, man, it's all about winning, right?
Yeah,
and that's what they're doing.
Win by 20, win by 1 is still a win, right?
And like those win by 1 games, I think there's a lot more value to those win by 1 games than those blowout games, because we've seen the Cubs on too many occasions in the past where they'll win those blowout games and then they'll lose all the close games. And so the fact that they're actually winning some close games here, they're you learn how to win those close games. That's something that's important when you're in a pennant race, is trying to figure out how to win the close games,
because playoff games are, by their nature, you've got better teams overall, but better pitching in particular, as you pointed out earlier. So you are typically going to see lower scoring games. And that's why, you look at something, and a lot of people, even though, I think there's a potential, Patrick Wisdom is almost certainly going to be non-tendered this season. But when you look at players like that, and maybe I brought this up before, so I don't want to belabor it too much, but, people are like, why is he here? Why is he here? Think about one swing in a playoff game, right? The teams that out-homer their opponents more, will win. And
1-1 game.
Yep. And that's if somebody makes a mistake and he can get rid of it. And that's right. So I'll put in a plug, and I kind of was joking about this a little bit, but Matt Shaw, the Cubs' top draft pick, right, homered twice in South Bend last night. This dude is, primarily shortstop in college, played some second base, Hasn't played the corner over third, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you that he's not going to play second or short for the Chicago Cubs at any point in the near future because they got that locked down. Dude, give me Matt Shaw at third base moving forward because that guy hits freaking tanks. And I guarantee if he can play short, he can play third. And look, Nicky Madrigal, fine, cool to keep him in there at certain spots when you need to.
You trade Madrigal.
Be gone. Probably.
Trade him.
Give me Matt Shaw. I don't care if he doesn't have that much experience.
Cubs need arms, man. They've got they have a lot of offensive talent down in the minor leagues.
Cade Horton.
They need some arms. Yeah.
Cade Horton, baby. Let's go.
He's not coming up this year, though, right?
No, he's not, but I think he could be up by next year. I mean, I think, again, you talk about a dude who could skip AAA. I think he's one of them. Does Wicks continue to do his thing? I don't know. But no, they've got some guys coming, but they're, as we said, right? Okay, let's look at PCA. Let's talk about, you got Kevin Alcantara, you got Canario, Brennan Davis is rehabbing himself. He's at South Bend on a rehab. I think we've all kind of forgotten and given up on him a bit, right? But,
yes.
But there's a ton of middle infielders too. There are a lot. Those guys can't all come up to the bigs, like period. But they certainly can't all come up to Chicago. It does. Owen Casey, right? So let's not even talk about Brennan Davis, Casey, Alcantara, Pete Crow Armstrong. The likelihood that the three of them are all in an outfield in Chicago at any point ever is incredibly low, right? I mean, again, you've got Suzuki there for another couple years. You got Happ there for another couple years. PCA's there in the middle. Like, what do you do then? Do you just leave them in the minors forever? Eventually, these guys are going to have to be traded for most likely pitching, right? If that's where they're lacking maybe a top end pitch. So I think, again, if you all are embracing these guys and thinking that in 2 years you're going to have a team made up solely of homegrown players, you're sorely mistaken, and you need to unlatch that embrace and let some of those guys go. And somebody asked me that, like I said, they need a starter. Somebody's like, hey, I know he's your dude, but what if Matt Mervis was? And I'm like, without a doubt. I mean, hey, I'd love for Mash to come back up and to be the Cubs first baseman. But at the end of the day, what I would prefer for him is to be with an organization where he can get the best possible shot and play and be a starter. If that's not going to be the Cubs, let's say they re-sign Bellinger and PCA's out in center and Bellinger's going to be the first baseman. I mean, Mash can still DH, but then you got Morel, whatever. So anyway, the best thing, obviously, you want all these guys coming up, being a part of the team, and that's cool to follow them through the minors. But I mean, and Matt's become a dude who I'm just personally I'm kind of friends with, right? So it's not just not like tight buddies, but text a little bit and catch up with him when he's here in town. But I want these guys to just go up and succeed. I mean, it kind of sucks to see dudes like that if they come in and beat up on the Cubs. Like if Nelson Velasquez hits a homer against the Cubs, or Jamer Candelario hit one against them earlier and then he came back around to them. But at the end of the day, like that's how that's supposed to work. You have, and it's not bad.
I mean, speaking of Jamer Candelario, right? I mean, here's a guy who came up with the Cubs, had to leave the Cubs to continue to develop, right, to get the playing time. Came back and he's contributing, right? And so it's like you can do that, right? It's not bad when you see like you said, personally, you root for these guys because you watch them through, as when they get drafted and as they're developing in the minor league system. So you have a personal attachment to them as a fan, and then to watch them go to another organization is good, particularly when they come back to the Cubs after they've done that.
just let them do that, yeah. But yeah, I think it's this off season, I think, is going to be one where we do finally see, because the Cubs are at that point where now they're ready to compete and they've got guys who are pushing up close enough that are going to start filling some of those spots. Because for the longest time, their strength was in the low minors. And so it's like, well, you don't want to move those guys quite yet because you don't know who's coming in where. But with Dansby Swanson locked up and with Nico Horner locked up, that all of a sudden, and then if you look at probably Shaw, and there's maybe a couple other guys, but all of a sudden that depth of middle infield players that you've got in the minors becomes much more valuable as trade capital, because you can't just sit there and let those guys, if they're ready, if they're going to be knocking on the door in the next year or two, well, what are you going to do with them? You're not going to call this guy up to be a backup shortstop and sit on the bench, when you could possibly turn him into a starting pitcher. So, yeah, good stuff.
Should be interesting. All right. Well, we'll circle back next week, and we should have a lot to talk about. It should be interesting. Saturday again, assuming that works for you. Play that by ear, but we'll at some point next week we'll circle back and yeah, I mean the Cubs are gonna, it's gonna be, we'll be following the doubleheader against the Reds, and I think hopefully the picture is a little bit more clear by then. But I doubt it.
We'll see.
So. All right, man.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. It's been good, been real. Go Cubs.
See you.